Hey everyone, it's Sarah from Spitfire. Wes Anderson and Alexandre Desplat, very excitingly, have another collaboration. The film is called The Phoenician Scheme, and it's going to be released at the end of the month and premiered at Cannes this year. In celebration of that and all the Cannes promotion Spitfire is doing, I decided to do a bit of a score prediction for how I think Desplat might score this next movie. To be clear, I'm sure Alexandre Desplat is going to do something super innovative and exciting, and he's probably going to use instruments I've never heard of. What I've written is just based on what his past scores for Wes Anderson films have been, but I'm sure he's going to probably blow all of our minds with what he actually writes. So I'm really excited to see that, and this is just a bit of fun using some of the libraries that we have in our limited edition bundles right now, which are based off of Cannes Awards categories. So it all ties together in this month of Cannes celebration that we're doing here. A little disclaimer I want to give before I start is that usually these types of videos, kind of breaking down other people's scores or mimicking other people's scores, I think can sometimes come off as diminishing of the composer's work. I just want to be clear, my intention is to do the opposite. I have so much respect for Alexandre Desplat's work and all of the scores he's done in collaboration with Wes Anderson. So, The Phoenician Scheme, Benicio del Toro playing this wealthy businessman, I think he's described as the wealthiest man in Europe, has decided to designate his daughter as the heir to his estate, the sole heir, even though he has like 10 kids or whatever. His daughter happens to be a nun, which is sort of fun. They basically, in this movie, seem to be going on a global adventure to set up one of his newest enterprises. But as they do so, they are targeted by scheming tycoons, terrorists, assassins, you name it. They face every obstacle as they try to go about setting up this new enterprise. From what I can tell, there's a lot of really interesting themes that should come across in the music, like Christianity, wealth. There should be a lot of darkness. There's crime, espionage. Similar to the Grand Budapest Hotel, it seems like the setting is vaguely European. And then finally, I think we can expect whimsy because that is classic Wes Anderson. And also, I watched the trailer and it's pretty whimsical. It's he always like strikes this really amazing balance between silly and serious, and in this case also dark. Alexandre Desplat and Wes Anderson have a long-standing creative collaboration. They've done many films together. Most notably, Desplat did the score for the Grand Budapest Hotel, which then won an Oscar for Best Original Score. I definitely drew a lot of inspiration from that film and that film's score. I basically played upon 3 musical levers to predict how Desplat's next score might sound. I thought a lot about instrumentation. I think that is one of the most characteristic elements of Desplat's scores, especially his Wes Anderson scores. The second element I was really careful about was rhythm. I noticed in Desplat's previous scores, he does a lot of straight rhythms and a lot of ostinatos. And finally, the third element I was really careful about was harmony. I wanted to keep the harmonies quite simple to keep that playful, quirky mood that Desplat's scores usually have. I also engaged some tritones, some diminished chords to make this feel darker and more like a thriller, which it partially is. So let's quickly have a listen, and then we'll dive into the layers. before I begin breaking this down, I want to give my random tip of the day for you. So this is a Logic tip. Something I often do when I'm composing in Logic is I will put in some MIDI for a certain instrument and then realize, I actually think I want that to happen in a different track. So I'll either copy it over somewhere else or I'll just completely replace it. So let's say I want this piano MIDI to be there instead. I move the automation data. So now I'm giving it to this plucked piano track, but the name of the region doesn't change. So I do a lot of stuff like that. And as a result, I end up with this really messy session where the regions have different names to what the actual instrument is, and I get confused, and other people get confused if I'm collaborating. And so the best way to just fix everything all at once is to select all your tracks with Shift F and then hit Option Shift N. And as you can see, it just renamed this region to match the track. And if you have any other regions that don't match the track name, it will just rename everything automatically. Hopefully that helped some people, but also hopefully a lot of people already knew that and haven't been wasting their life away renaming regions like I have. Let's start with this intro, which is quite clearly different from the rest of the sections. But I just was actually quite inspired by the trailer. So if you watch the trailer, you'll see the beginning of that starts with a plane crash. This main character, his name's Jaja. He's basically in a plane crash. It seems like it was intentional. And he kind of survives it and gets up and just looks really crazy. He's got like bandages all over his face and he's got a black eye and he's like in this field. So it's very dark and ominous and weird, but it's also overly dramatic to a point that is silly. And so that's what I was going for. I started with some Woodwind Evos. I've really only scraped the surface with this library. There's a lot happening. There's a lot you can do and a lot you can change. But I just sort of wanted a pad of like darkness with a lot of movement and texture, like dynamic textures. So I actually just selected the Dirty Moments preset and then stuck with that preset. But yeah, there's all these effects you can put on the Woodwind Evolutions. But otherwise, yeah, this library is full of patches that are like seemingly infinite as long as you hold down the key. And it's all these different woodwind layers and textures evolving. So this is the preset I used. So you'll see it starts to change after some time. Evolutions are just super, super useful in film scoring. As a scene develops, you can have your music also developing, but in a subtle way that feels more collaborative with the visuals. So I'm also using the London Contemporary Orchestra Strings Library, which is really different from the other Spitfire string libraries. We have so many string libraries, but there's a reason, and it's because string instruments can do a lot of different things. This library was recorded with the LCO players, actually at Spitfire's old studios. It's a smaller ensemble. It's 6 violins, 4 violas, 3 cellos, 2 basses. It's recorded in a really, really dry studio. So it's really quite gritty and avant-garde. Most of these textures that you can get from this library are really gritty. It has the players like sinking their bows into the string, playing on weird parts of the string that you don't normally play at, so over the fingerboard, on the bridge. There's a lot of really cool stuff. It's definitely good for dark things, creepy things. Anytime you want to create a feeling of like uncertainty, tension, like something's not right. Anyway, I've actually loaded up 2 patches on top of each other here, and the first is this granular to normal texture. Then the other layer is this twitchy patch, which is almost like a regular long note, but you can hear there's the occasional glitch. And that's just kind of an extended technique the players can do. Those are my two dark textural layers to lay down the vibe here. And then also inspired by this plane crash and this dark opening of the trailer, I wanted to get like the lowest possible notes on a piano, just sort of walking around, creating an uneasy feeling, but creating more movement than I have. I went back and forth between what notes to put here, but in the end it didn't really matter. It's just about the feeling that it creates. So that's the lowest note on the piano, and this is the BBC SO Piano Pro, which is like our crispest, cleanest piano, and it's also in one of our bundles. Just any sort of walking bass, I just wanted it in there because it just felt like a very typical horror genre type of sound. So yeah, those are the 3 layers I have there. Then I added one of our organs on labs just to sort of have a little pop of religion in there in the first 2 sections of the piece, just to sort of set up that vibe, sort of a nod to this wealthy businessman's nun daughter. And then I added some timpani rolls. In this next section, I'm calling it Once Upon a Time because I wanted it to feel magical and like we're setting up this magical fictional world. We will be put into this new magical like storybook kind of world. I wanted to also continue this like overly dramatic mood setting that I have going on. I want to prep the audience for a proper story, a proper tale of adventure and sorrow and wealth and all these things. Okay, so I'm using the Mandolin Swarm from the Spitfire Swarms library because I've heard a lot of mandolins in Desplat's music, and also because the mandolin sort of evokes this European feeling. I think that's why Desplat uses it a lot, especially in the Grand Budapest Hotel. So I have some mandolin swarm layers here. I've got the organ still. And then I'm adding in some piano arpeggios with the BBC SO piano, because honestly, I just want to show off how nice the piano is. And then finally, as we're kind of leading into the next section, I added some allophone in, and then some more Woodwind Evolutions to build some tension into the next section. And that library leaves a really nice release, which I wanted to have. I wanted to have a little pause in between sections, but still some sort of reverb, some sort of reverberance of the past section. So that gets me there. And then I introduced the harpsichord, which is a really characteristic instrument for Wes Anderson, Alexandre Desplat collaborations. I feel like the harpsichord evokes not only like wealth and fanciness and opulence, but also it evokes Europe to me. Little release. and then we're into the next section. So this is what I'm calling the espionage section, because it seems like throughout the movie there are these perpetual themes of like espionage and crime and a little bit of mystery and intrigue, but of course in the Wes Anderson whimsical type of way. I want to start having some feelings of like strength and like something that feels militant, and so that's why I'm using this straight rhythm. And I'm also emphasizing that straight militant rhythm with the LCO strings bass staccatos. So this is bass and cello doubled. So that's how we're setting the tone for this next section. But I also needed something intriguing and mysterious to create that feeling of spying, of mystery, that this story most definitely has. I'm doing that with harmony. So as we get into the second part of this section, I have some chromatic movements in the harmony. That upper voice is just moving down by minor seconds. And then I'm also introducing some melodic phrases in the cymbalum, doubled by the plucked piano. Those two instruments together create that intrigue that I want. The cymbalum itself also is an instrument that I feel like is also an instrument that evokes this vague European feeling. It's a Hungarian folk instrument, and Desplat actually used it a lot in the Grand Budapest Hotel score. It was like one of the main features of that score. Very related. It's in the same family as instruments we're more familiar with, like the dulcimer. So the cymbalum comes from our Symphonic Extras library, which is relatively a new release. More instruments that go well with an orchestra. It's the cymbalum, we've got harpsichord, allophone, which I've used in this score to replace moments that might make sense for a glockenspiel. I have a mandolin swarm layer reinforcing these chords in the harpsichord. And then I have another LCO strings layer. And this is violins doing a very irregular tremolo. So here's how that sounds together. So then in this next section, we have the cymbalum leading the chords. So yeah, in the harpsichord, we're leading into a D minor moment, but I'm letting the cymbalum take over. The cymbalum specifically, I want to point out how much you can vary the sound of it. So this is how it sounds with dynamics at 0. But if you were to increase the dynamics, it's completely different. There's basically a tremolo. With a really long tail. If we put the pedal down, the tail will be even longer. The dynamics back down, but also the pedal down. And then you can switch up the mic positions to get it even more ambient. So just those tiny tweaks and I've already got a completely different sound. But this is where we were. Because I wanted that dry, close-up, more playful sound from the cymbalum for this. We still have these short notes in the bass, but they're getting more rhythmic and intense. If you have a refined ear, you'll hear that that's like a little out of tune, but that is intentional. This patch is called vivid spiccato. So it's a spiccato, it's a very short note, it's punchy, but it's also got a little something else to it. Especially when you're using sample libraries, anything you can do to make your music sound a little more unique and less like it's come from a factory or a robot. Anything you can do to like humanize it and bring in some points of interest and intrigue will help you a lot. For this second half, I'm bringing in 2 new textures. So one is the allophone. I've noticed Alexandre Desplat in listening to a lot of his scores for Wes Anderson films. He really uses a lot of tuned percussion. He loves like bells and glockenspiel, xylophone, tubular bells, anything sort of punchy and high-pitched and frankly cute. I noticed he has a lot of sounds like that in his scores, but I didn't want to use something too generic. I mean, I think all of this is like heavily leaning towards Desplat's like trademark instrumentation. And so one thing I did to sort of differentiate this is to use the allophone instead of something more typical like the glockenspiel. I've also re-entered some violin pizzicatos from LCO strings, which are quite percussive, and so they do come out in the mix in a really fun way. So it brings a little life into this final chunk of the espionage section. Finally, we're in this section I call Trickery. This is led by some harpsichord ostinatos. The tempo, you'll notice, is increasing throughout the espionage section to get us back into our final section of the piece, which is supposed to feel more fast-paced and adventurous and fun. I'm calling it Trickery because of all the sections, this last section, I was most inspired by the adventure that these characters are embarking on. It's just a lot of trickery, a lot of people trying to manipulate and deceive one another, and it's just a lot of games. So I wanted this section to feel very like playful and whimsical, but also like still have that feeling of scheming and spying. And so I'm leading with this harpsichord. It's very light and bouncy. I'm responding to that ostinato in the cymbalum with a secondary ostinato that goes like... The rhythms I'm employing here are very much inspired by Desplat and the way he creates whimsy in his music for these types of films. I've got the cymbalum and harpsichord playing with each other. I've got the BBC piano. Then I bring in some cute little allophone. It's quite a quiet library, so I definitely have to go in and make sure all the volumes are nicely balanced. Employing the great timpani roll, oldest trick in the book. I'm building into this like final more bombastic section. Another typical Desplat move is to have this like walking bass in the tuba. So I have the tuba and bass from SSO sharing this line. I'm pulling out all of Alexandre Desplat's stops here. I've got a walking bass in the tuba and the string bass section from SSO. I've got some timpani hits. It's all like really typical from especially the Grand Budapest Hotel score. I have some snares to bring in that militant feeling again, the feeling of like fighting. So this is all of the supporting layers. And then I didn't mention this before, but I used a bit of the Hammers library because I really liked that snare drum, and I felt like for a Desplat-inspired score, like I definitely needed a good snare. So I pulled in the big guns there, pulled in some hammers. Yeah, otherwise, in terms of mixing, I threw a little air reverb on there, just a really low mix of air reverb. I've got a limiter on here. I'm going in, I'm balancing the volumes of everything, adjusting frequencies, removing any harsh resonances. So those are some very much Desplat-inspired sketches for what I think this next score might sound like. It's really quite similar to his previous scores, so I can almost guarantee he's going to do something more innovative than this. But yeah, I can't stress enough that I'm just copying what I've seen from the Wes Anderson Alexandre Desplat collaboration in the past. I've been given 6 or 7 previous scores. I've listened, I've ingested, I've figured out what instruments to use, and I've made something from that. I just can't wait to see what it actually sounds like. So yeah, go check out the can bundles we've created, and hope this was helpful. Hope you learned something. Let us know if you have any questions in the comments. Thank you so much. Bye.